Good morning, everyone. My name is Pratikshya Kandel, and today I'm here to give presentation on my PhD proposal, which is titled as Evaluating the Socio-economic and Environmental Impacts of Protected Area Policy, Buffer Zone Policy in Nepal. My supervisors are Ram Pandit, Ben White, and Maxim Polakov. So this is the general outline of my presentation today. Well, moving on to the background. Protected areas are considered as an effective policy approach to protect biodiversity and ecosystem services. Protected areas are continuously expanding in the world, particularly in developing countries. So protected area coverage has increased from 17 million kilometers square in 2000 to 45 million kilometers square in 2017. So by the end of 2020, it is expected to reach 59 million kilometers square. So as of now, protected areas cover 15% of the Earth's terrestrial surface and 7% of the ocean. So protected areas are public goods, but they can also have private costs. Generally, costs of conservation is largely borne by local people while providing global benefits. Situation is even more acute in developing countries where local people depend on natural resources that are locally available for their livelihood and sustenance. So local people must be, or they should be compensated for any kind of losses that might occur due to conservation action, because for the successful conservation programs, benefits must exceed cost for most of the household in the communities. So minimizing the local cost of conservation is a major challenge. So because of these increased number of protected areas and their realized cost and benefits to the local communities, conservationists, policymakers, and economists are more interested in evaluating their performance and impacts. Yet the scientific evidence related to the impacts of protected areas on local households' welfare and environmental conservation in those areas is not very adequately known. So now talking about the Nepalese context, biodiversity conservation along with improved social welfare has always been high on Nepal's policy agenda. Nepal has always been at the forefront in South Asia for the biodiversity conservation. Nepal has been continuously expanding its protected areas from 10% in 1970s to more than 23% in recent years. Nepal instituted this legal commitment to biodiversity conservation through National Parks and Wildlife Conservation Act in 1973. While forming this act was very restrictive in nature, because of which it put restriction on the local people and it controlled customary rights of the local people for the resource extraction, and it didn't allow people to follow their traditional practices of land use, because of which it came in direct conflict with the local people. Also, human-wildlife conflict incidences were increasing because of this increased protection of the wildlife. So there was this even more increased tension or conflict between park and people, because of it a medium way or a strategy was needed that could balance or address the need of conservation, as well as that could meet the objective of conservation as well as meet the need of local people for the local resources. So as a result, with the subsequent amendment of this act, in the 4th amendment in 1992, the concept of buffer zone came in Nepal. So the act defined buffer zone as a peripheral area of a national park or reserve prescribed under the section 3A in order to provide facilities to use forest resources on a regular and beneficial basis for the local people. So here, this is one of the example of Bardia National Park, which is also one of our study sites. Here, this is the core protected area, and here this white part, it represents the buffer zone in Bardia National Park. So this provision of the buffer zone brought a major shift in governance system in Nepal's protected areas. There is this shift from this very human-centered approach to a balanced human and wildlife-centered approach. And this buffer zone is any kind of activities related to conservation or development activities in the buffer zone areas is largely guided by this buffer zone management policy. So buffer zone management policy, most importantly, it allows like redistribution of benefits arising from protected area revenue that can be up to 30 to 50% to go to the buffer zone communities to carry out different kind of conservation and development related works. But like it has been more than 2 decades, almost 3 decades that this policy is in place in Nepal, but there is not any kind of impact analysis of these people. How does it impact on local people, welfare or environmental conservation in a particular area? So there is this revenue coming from the park every year, and it goes to the buffer zone communities for carrying out different kind of activities. So every year various kind of activities are carried out. For example, community development, income generating activities, activities related to human-wildlife conflict mitigation and protection, and activities related to alternative energy programs, wildlife conservation and habitat management, different kind of conservation education and awareness programs, and activities that are related to climate change adaptation. So in this research, we'll be focusing more on income-generating activities and alternative energy program, because here you can see like substantial amount of the money, like 15% of the amount is spent on carrying out income-generating activities every year in the buffer zone areas, and also almost 9% of the budget is spent on providing alternative energy sources to the local people. So the main aim of these programs is basically to improve livelihood of the local people or welfare of the local people by diversifying their income-generating activities and improving the natural resources conservation of the area by providing alternative energy sources. So different kinds of income generating activities include, like for example, giving trainings or education programs on improving agriculture, for example, livestock farming, vegetable farming, beekeeping, and promoting ecotourism, for example, homestay management, nature guide, and also like capacity building in terms of, for example, sewing and embroidery training, knitting training, computer and mobile repairs. So every year, huge amount of money goes to carrying out these activities in the buffer zone areas. And it has been repeating every year since its formal introduction, but there are no studies that have shown the efficacy of these programs. We do not know what impact does this program put on the local people, or has the intended benefits have achieved by the local communities. So touching upon this ecotourism story in Nepal's protected areas. So protected areas in Nepal are the major ecotourism destination. World Tourism Organization has defined ecotourism as all form of nature-based tourism, where the tourists are supposed to enjoy and appreciate the nature and respect the culture of the local communities. Also, there should be notable participation from the local communities in the ecotourism program, and it should contribute to the welfare of those people who are managing the resources or conserving the area for the natural resources conservation. So ecotourism is largely promoted by Nepal government as a viable strategy for conservation and development in the protected areas. Ecotourism, with support from the government, various kind of national and international agencies and other line agencies, it is increasing. In fact, it's thriving in all the protected areas of Nepal. So ecotourism can also have positive as well as negative impacts on household welfare. So ecotourism can induce positive impacts on household welfare by providing employment and different kind of income generating opportunities and business opportunities. On the other hand, it can also impart negative consequences on household welfare through increased inequalities, increased inflation, and shortage of labor in farm activities due to reallocation of labor in the tourism sector. So it is crucial to examine the linkages between protected areas, local tourism participation, socio-economic development, and environmental conservation to see if the benefits that are derived from the protected areas are channeled to the household through the medium of ecotourism. Also, it is very much like pertinent to understand if this the impact of ecotourism goes directly to the intended beneficiaries, and does it contributes to developing pro-environmental behavior in the local communities in buffer zone areas. So globally, there are considerable amount of research that have looked after the positive and negative impact of protected areas on local people. However, not many papers have used adequate baseline or counterfactual to determine the impacts of protected areas. There are few studies with proper data and methodology to accurately estimate the impact, and very few studies have quantitatively examined the mechanism through which protected areas generate impacts. In Nepal, to my knowledge, there are only 2 studies that have estimated the social impact of protected areas. A study by ARE-UWA et al. 2017, they developed a theoretical model where they showed that conservation, when combined with alternative income generating sector, can have positive impact on welfare. Study by Bardia et al. They assessed how this protected areas can influence poverty, extreme poverty and inequalities in Nepal. So both of these studies have used national data sets like Nepal Living Standard data and Nepal census data, national census data, to look at the social impact of protected areas, and they have discussed about the impact of protected areas in broader scale. So we know that this impacts of the protected areas is largely borne by the local communities. The cost and benefits both are largely borne by the local community. It is essential to look if the impacts are at the local level. Also, communities in the protected areas in Nepal are quite heterogeneous. So situation might be different in one protected areas than in the other. So it is also essential to have empirical evidence at the local level to make any site-specific policy suggestions. So neither of these papers assess the welfare and environmental effect of protected areas and buffer zone programs at the local level. More specifically, there are no studies that have assessed the impacts of buffer zone policies on local level. And also, no study has tried to examine how benefits from ecotourism have channels to impact household welfare and contribute to pro-environmental behavior on a household. There are no studies that has tried to establish the causal linkages between protected areas, local tourism participation, socio-economic development, and environmental conservation in buffer zone communities. So against these backdrop, the general objective of my study is to empirically evaluate the socio-economic and environmental impacts of Nepal buffer zone management policy. Specifically, this study aims to evaluate the effect of this policy on household welfare by examining income generating activities, to evaluate the effect of this policy on household environmental conservation practices by examining the alternative energy program, and to examine whether ecotourism is an effective mechanism to generate impacts on household welfare and environmental conservation practices in buffer zone areas. So for this study, we have selected Bardia National Park and Chitwan National Park as our study site. Both of these national parks lie in the Tarai lowland in southern region of Nepal. So both these national parks are among the oldest and most significant national parks in Nepal. Buffer zone areas in these national parks were established in the same year in 1996. They share similar geographical, climatic, and biophysical characteristics. And both these national parks provide habitat to charismatic megafauna like one-horned rhinoceros, Asiatic elephant, Bengal tigers, Gharial crocodiles, and many more. And but despite these similarities, these two protected areas have some major differences. For example, Chitwan National Park being Chitwan National Park is one of the most visited and highest revenue generating protected area in Nepal. As a result, the amount of money that goes to the buffer zone communities to carry out different kind of conservation and development activities also quite high in Chitwan National Park. And also, since it is one of the oldest and the pioneering national park in Nepal, it has always received a lot of attention from government and different kind of other organization, conservation and development organization. On the other hand, Bardia National Park receives way too less number of visitors than Chitwan National Park, and the amount of money that goes to Bardia National Park buffer zone committees is also relatively very less as compared to Chitwan National Park. Also, these two national parks lie in the same geographical region. Both of them are easily accessible and they have similar kind of buffer zone programs. So we have selected this Chitwan National Park and Bardia National Park for our study. So we will use multi-stage stratified random sampling to select sample households. Firstly, like two national parks with the buffer zone areas established in the same year and that shares similar kind of geographical, biophysical and climatic characteristics with similar characteristics is purposely selected, and then the buffer zone user committees who have received benefits in terms of alternative energy program and income generating activities will be selected, and then the sample households will be selected from the list of the households who have received benefits in terms of these programs. And for comparison, we will select non-participants from the area outside the buffer zone. For the comparison, we will do this using the matching method, which I'll explain later. So we will use household survey and focus group discussion to elicit data for this research. For the like 720 households will be, this questionnaire will be administered to 720 households. And for the objective one, that is to evaluate the impact of income generating activities. We will select 75 households as participants, those who have participated in that program, and 105 households as non-participant from area outside the buffer zone area. So it gives 180 households in one national park, accounting for a total of 360 households in two national parks for one objective. So we will select same number or households for the objective 2, that is evaluating the impact of alternative energy program. So there will also be 360 households for this second objective. And for the third objective, where we aim to look at the impact of ecotourism, we will use all those 720 households, like 300 households for, or 720 households for objective 3. So to select the households that did not participate in the program, we will use the area of 4 kilometers outside the buffer zone from its boundary. So how do we select the programs? So for this, we compile the list of programs from the annual reports of the national park that are mainly aimed at providing alternative income or diversifying income generating activities to the buffer zone communities, and another one is in providing alternative energy sources to the households in the buffer zone communities. So we selected those programs where the substantial amount of fund has been allocated every year and a large number of people participate in those kind of programs. So for instance, you can see here in this sieving in embroidery training, these are among the list of the activities that are aimed at providing alternative income generating activities to the households in the buffer zone communities. In the year 2014 and 15, almost 13,000 USD has been spent in giving this training to 93 participants in one particular year. So in the year 2015 and 16, more than 6,000 USD was spent in giving training to 34 participants. So we looked at the budget, the frequency, the number of participants that are involved in these activities, and we selected those activities where the substantial amount of budget is spent. So similarly for the alternative energy programs, we chose biogas installation. There are activities related to installation of biogas and then solar energy panels and distribution of improved cooking stoves to see if these kind of activities have contributed to pro-environmental behavior on household in the buffer zone communities. We chose ecotourism as another intervention because, like, most of the time ecotourism is one of the major alternative income generating sector that develops in the areas surrounding protected areas. So we will use household as the unit of analysis in this research, household income as a proxy of household welfare. So typically the income of a household is determinant of human capital, physical capital, social asset and locational characteristics. We will also see if there is some effect of the participation, what is the effect of the participating in buffer zone program. So this impact evaluation of the program is carried out to see if there is a desired outcome on individual or group or institution. So two things are important while carrying out impact evaluation. So one is accurately estimating the counterfactual, that is what would have happened if there had no intervention, and another is controlling confounding baseline characteristics that may have contributed to the participation of the people in the intervention and outcomes. So counterfactuals are necessary for the comparisons between treatment and control groups. In this study, treatment groups refer to those people who have, or households who have participated in the programs, and control group refers to those households who have not participated in the programs. We'll determine these control groups using matching method. So controlling confounding baseline characteristics is important to isolate the impact of the intervention. Controlling confounding variables between control and treated groups involves controlling the variables like human capital and socio-demographic variables, physical capital variables, social asset variable, and locational variables. So we will use propensity score matching to carry out this study. So with the help of PSM, we will construct a statistically determined comparison group with similar characteristics to the treatment group, the only difference being the program participation. For the PSM, the first step will be to calculate the propensity score. That is the probability of a household being participating in the intervention given the set of characteristics. So second step is to match one participating households, one treatment household with one or more control households. So once the mass set of treatment and the control group is formed, so the impact is estimated by directly comparing the outcomes between treatment and the control groups, or the participant or the non-participants. So the average treatment effect is simply the difference in average outcome between program participants and non-participants, which can be expressed as this, where I refers to the households from 1 to n, yi refers to outcomes observed in the presence of the program, and yi0 refers to the outcomes observed in the absence of the program, and e refers to the expectation operator from probability theory. Since an individual can only be in one group at any point of time, measuring the outcomes of the group who did not participate in the program but closely resemble to those participants is as close as we can get. So thus we will estimate the average treatment effect on the treated, which is the average outcome had they not participated in the program. So this cannot be directly observed, but we can estimate this with the help of comparison groups. So ATT can be expressed as this, and where di equal to 1 denotes conditional on the household being exposed to the treatment group, di equal to 0 denotes conditional on the household being exposed to the untreated or control groups. And the difference in the outcomes of the treated and of the control group can be attributed to the treatment. So why did we choose PSM? Because our research is quasi-experimental. It follows quasi-experimental research design because interventions were non-experimental and participants were non-randomly assigned. And PSM, or propensity score matching, overcomes selection bias that may arise due to non-random assignment of the intervention participant. Also, it allows controlling for the observable characteristics between control and the treatment groups. So dependent and the independent variables of this research are like for the objective one, that involves determining the socio-economic impacts of income generating activities. program-specific household income will be considered as a dependent variable, and we will compare the program-specific household income between the households inside and outside the buffer zone for the objective 2, which involves evaluating the impacts on environmental conservation practices. Monthly fuel wood consumption per household will be taken as a dependent variable. So we'll be comparing these monthly fuel wood consumption per household in the household inside and outside buffer zone. Similarly, for the objective 3, where the socio-economic impacts of ecotourism will be evaluated, we will use income share from the ecotourism per household as the dependent variable, and we'll also explore factors that affect such income. So independent variables include human capital and socio-demographic variables like household size, age, sex, education of household head, number of children, number of male and female adults, physical capital like total land holding, cultivated land, fallow land, livestock holding, on-farm and off-farm income, social asset and infrastructure like group membership, distance to nearest market, distance to nearest city, distance to protected area, and locational characteristics if the household is within or outside the buffer zone area. So the significance of the potential contribution of this research. So this study is first of its kind in Nepal to evaluate impact of buffer zone policies in conservation and development outcomes at the local level. Unlike other studies that are carried out in Nepal, it will use a robust methodology of a matching method to estimate impacts of protected areas through buffer zone program and ecotourism. The findings of this study will be useful in designing appropriate conservation programs, reforming existing policy which has not been refined or revised since its formation, and allocating this finite conservation resources very optimally and efficiently in the future. And also the finding of this study can also be applicable in other areas which have similar policy contexts like in Thailand and Kenya. So last but not the least, I'd like to thank UWA for providing me this opportunity to carry out this research, to do my PhD. And I would also like to thank my supervisors for their constant guidance and mentorship. And I'd like to thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. I would be very happy to get comment, feedback, or inputs in my presentation. I mean, like method or analytical approach or in my proposal. Thank you.